Of all the strange things in our solar system, few are quite as mysterious as Uranus's rings. Unlike those of Saturn, which are intermediate in complexity, the rings of Uranus are weirdly simple. They're thin, dark, and narrow, only a few miles wide and hundreds of miles long. And though we can see that they stretch around the planet like a tight belt, we don't know what they're made of, where they came from, or why they look so strange. And that's just the start of the weirdness. Take a closer look at Uranus' rings, and you'll notice that some of them aren't smooth. Instead, they have kinks and humps and even braids, and then there are the clumps. There are clumps within the clumps, all grouped together like some kind of celestial fruit. What's going on here? Is there an invisible hand reaching out to mold these rings into strange shapes? Well, the truth may be stranger than fiction. This is our channel. And today we're answering the extraordinary question, why does Uranus have rings? First, let's compare Uranus's rings to those of Saturn. You've probably seen pictures of Saturn's rings before. If not, here's your reminder. These rings are intermediate in complexity, halfway between the more extensive set around Jupiter and Neptune and the simpler rings found around Jupiter's moon Europa and Neptune's moon Proteus. Saturn's rings are intermediate in complexity for a reason. Scientists think that their intermediate nature reflects the intermediate complexity of their origin story. Saturn's rings probably formed when something big crashed into one of its moons, vaporizing the icy rock and leaving it in orbit around the planet. The smaller rings likely formed when smaller objects hit the surface of the moon, creating more debris that stayed in orbit. Uranus's rings are different, but they're also similar. Like Saturn, Uranus has intermediate gravity and an intermediate magnetic field. And yet, its rings are far simpler. They're intermediate neither in complexity nor in size. So, how could this happen? Scientists have two theories. The first is that Uranus's rings formed the same way Saturn's did, but something disrupted them and knocked most of them out of existence. We know that Uranus has been hit by large objects in the past. There are craters on its surface, for instance. But we don't know exactly when this bombardment occurred, how severe it was, or whether any collision specifically knocked the rings out of shape. The second possibility is that Uranus's rings formed differently. Maybe they're not made of ice and rock at all. Maybe they're made of dust, which could explain their unusual dark color. Or maybe they're intermediate in composition, halfway between rock and dust. Either way, we'd need to do more research to figure out if this is true. For now, let's talk about the bumps and braids. To understand what's going on with Uranus's rings, we need to take a closer look. Uranus's rings were discovered by William Herschel in 1781. Since then, scientists have identified 14 major rings. All of Uranus's rings are intermediate in complexity. They have a central portion that's opaque and extends outward into a transparent sheath. The opaque part is called the limb, and the transparent part is called the wake. Together, they form a structure known as a disk. And because Uranus rotates on its axis, each ring looks a bit squashed from the poles. But despite their overall similarity, there are some key differences between Uranus's rings. Their widths range from just a few miles to more than 100, and although we think they are all opaque, some appear darker than others. For example, the opaque parts of Uranus's innermost rings are only about half as wide as its outermost rings. And while most of them are opaque, some are translucent. Take a closer look, and you'll see that the thinnest rings also have the strangest shapes. Some are straight, while others curve and loop and braid. It's almost as if some external force is dragging them into unusual shapes. Here's the weirdest of the bunch. They're called the intermediate rings. They're opaque, dark, and narrow, only a few miles wide and hundreds of miles long. If Uranus's rings formed the same way Saturn's did, we'd expect them to be intermediate in complexity. But instead, they're simple, stretching around the planet like a tight belt. We also wouldn't expect them to be so dark. Are these clumps evidence of an invisible hand reaching out to mold Uranus's rings into strange shapes? Well, there are a few possible explanations. As a result, scientists don't really know what's going on with the majority of moons out there. It's possible that some of them are hiding in plain sight, disguised as clumps within Uranus's rings. These characteristics are typical of moons, but unusual for clumps. This makes sense given that Uranus's rings are also intermediate in complexity. It's the gravitational pull of the clumps as they coalesce into moons. Unfortunately, we don't have any hard evidence to support this idea. Even today, our understanding of Uranus's rings is limited. We can't see them very well, and we don't have any samples to study. And because they're so closely packed, they can easily blend together. Some are as small as a few hundred miles across, while others stretch for thousands of miles. Others are more complex, with their own smaller rings and wakes. But it contains three smaller structures: intermediate, simple, and complex. If so, the clumps could be the remains of those moons. Maybe they were destroyed by a large object or torn apart by Uranus's gravity. Either way, they wouldn't be the first objects to end up in Uranus's rings. As for the braids, humps, and other strange shapes, we don't know exactly what caused them. One possibility is that they're the result of magnetic forces. Uranus has a strong magnetic field that extends thousands of miles into space. Another possibility is that the clumps themselves are responsible for the strange shapes. After all, they do have their own wakes and humps and braids. Maybe they're interacting with each other in some way that we don't yet understand. Whatever the explanation, it's clear that Uranus's rings are more than just a simple belt around the planet. They're a complex and dynamic system that scientists are only beginning to understand. We don't know what they're made of, where they came from, or why they look so strange. But that's part of what makes them so fascinating. In the coming years, new missions will explore Uranus and its rings in greater detail than ever before, and who knows what secrets they'll uncover. Maybe they'll reveal the truth behind the clumps, braids, and humps, or maybe they'll point to something even stranger. One thing's for sure, though, it's going to be an exciting ride. Now you know more about Uranus's rings than anyone else out there, so why not share what you've learned? Tell your friends about the clumps and braids, or send your family a link to this video. Everyone deserves to know about the mysteries of our solar system. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload.